Welcome to the third week of our message series, The Harvest Principle. We're going to be wrapping up this series next weekend, which is Stewardship Sunday. But just to recap what we've been talking about here, the harvest principle is simply this, that you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow. This principle governs the whole of life, and we learn it from the process of farming. You plant a seed, and with the proper conditions, you can expect eventually to reap the rewards of what you have sown. And you reap in kind with what you've sown. So if you plant a cucumber seed, you can expect a cucumber and only a cucumber. Similarly, when we sow a good seed, we're going to have good fruit in return. And bad seed brings about bad fruit. It's true that not everything in our lives is a result of what we have sown for ourselves, but everything, or nearly everything we sow, will yield something for ourselves or for someone else. We've talked about two important corollaries to this principle. Firstly, that you reap what you sow, but it's always later. It's always later. You don't plant a seed today, and tomorrow suddenly you have a harvest. That's not the way it works. It takes time. And sometimes it requires patience. And it can be frustrating because we want it and we want it now. Secondly, you reap what you sow, but it's always greater. The more you plant, the more you reap. And that counts for good and for bad. So far, we've applied this principle to our character, and last week we applied it to our finances. And today we want to apply the harvest principle to a very practical area of our life, an area that the Bible talks about all the time. To do this, we're going to look at a passage from the book of Daniel, which we heard today as our first reading. Now, Daniel was one of the four major prophets of the Old Testament, and the book of Daniel is his backstory. You see, in the 5th century BC, Babylon, or what is now modern-day Iraq, was the most powerful empire in the entire world. And in 587 BC, the Babylonians captured Jerusalem, effectively bringing the kingdom of Judah to an end and forcing most of the Jewish residents into exile. The best and the brightest among them, like young Daniel and his companions, were taken to serve at the court of the king of Babylon. Sounds like a pretty good gig. And it was. Except for one thing. The king of Babylon was cruel, and he was crazy. And those two things together are not very good. So the book of Daniel is divided into two parts. The first part, we hear of Daniel's backstory, in which he and his friends go to heroic lengths to maintain their faith and their fidelity to God, despite all the persecution and all the hardships they would endure. The second part contains a series of visions and prophecies that Daniel experienced. Visions of the future and how God would act in the future on behalf of Israel. The passage we're looking at today is one of these visions. By the way, if you're new to church or if you're not even a Christian, these verses might strike you as strange. They may strike you as strange because they are strange. They're very strange. Lifelong Christians struggle to make sense of them. Scholars and theologians argue back and forth about what they might mean. Daniel is using a language that is unfamiliar to us, describing realities that are incomprehensible. It's a style of literature found throughout the Bible, and it's called apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic literature, like the apocalypse. It includes visions of the future and sometimes complicated symbolism, but always with a purpose and always with a present application. So stick with me. I promise to make this practical. So here's what Daniel says. At that time, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise. There shall be a time of anguish, such as has never occurred since nations first came into existence. That sounds a bit unpleasant, doesn't it? Daniel is describing a time preceding the end of the world. And the central figure in this time will be the archangel Michael, who we know from elsewhere in Scripture as an incredibly powerful warrior, the leader of the heavenly hosts of angels, who tends to show up whenever serious stuff is going down. So Daniel is looking ahead to this end time, a time he describes as unsurpassed in anguish. He continues on a slightly more hopeful note. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Daniel is looking ahead to trouble and to distress, which the future will bring for everyone. Not everyone will have the same experience, though. Some are going to be beat up by it. Some are going to be overcome by it. But one particular group, friends, one particular group will be at a unique advantage, and that's the wise. Wise people are at a unique advantage. Daniel says that those who cultivate wisdom will enjoy success. He compares them to stars that are shining brightly in the darkness of night. So today, we're going to look at sowing seeds of wisdom. We're going to look at sowing seeds of wisdom. So what is wisdom? Well, wisdom is the integration of knowledge and experience with understanding. So knowledge and experience with understanding. Everybody's got knowledge and everybody's got experience, but not everybody understands what they're experiencing. And understanding applied to our experience and knowledge equals wisdom. There are two facts of life that wise people do understand way better than anyone else. Firstly, that we will face trouble in life. Trouble is a certainty of life. Now, I know that you might be sitting there scratching your head and thinking, why can't you be more positive? Okay, I'm positive. I'm positive that trouble is on the way, and that trouble is a certainty of life. And sooner or later, trouble is headed your way, and trouble is headed my way too. You can avoid some of it for sure, but you can't avoid it entirely. What you can do is prepare for it. What you can do is prepare for it. You can sow seeds now so that when trouble does come your way, you're ready. You're able to survive. You can even thrive through difficulties and challenges. How do you do that? Well, we were talking before about applying understanding to what we're learning, to what we are experiencing. And we can apply an eternal perspective when it comes to our knowledge and our experience. You can learn to view life through the lens of eternity. You can learn to view life through a different lens, through the lens of eternity. That's the best way to look at life. Wisdom is all about prioritizing the eternal and then fitting in the temporal. You know, things like houses and cars and clothes and hockey, believe it or not, they're all temporary. They're all temporary. They're good things, they're great things, but they're temporary things. At the same time, things like accidents and delays, danger, disease, death, even terrorism, they're bad things, for sure, but they're also temporary. They come to an end. Only God and God's people are eternal. Only God and God's people are eternal. Of course, the remaining question today is, how do you get that lens of eternity focused on your experience and what you're learning? How do you do that? And I know that I need to answer that question if this message is going to be of any use to you at all. But in preparing for this message today, I really struggled to articulate my answer. I struggle to articulate it in a way that doesn't disappoint through its simplicity, because the answer is just what you would expect to hear from the church guy. But here it goes. My answer is this. You begin to sow seeds of wisdom through prayer. You begin to sow seeds of wisdom through prayer. It's that easy. Prayer is foundational, indispensable when it comes to our cultivation of wisdom. In the past, we've talked about prayer from a twofold approach. Firstly, daily quiet time of personal prayer that you can do at home, at your own time. Secondly, matched with weekly worship here at Mass. So private worship at home, and then weekly worship at Mass, those two together. A lot of people, despite their best efforts, don't pray. Often because they don't think they have enough time to pray. And a lot of people don't come to church more and more, as statistics will tell us. And it's not because they've got some kind of doctrinal issue with the church. It's not because they have a disagreement with the church. It's often because they don't think they have enough time. Right? We're just so busy. We don't have enough time. What they're doing is they are prioritizing the temporary over the eternal. When you reverse that, though, through your quiet daily time and through your weekly worship, and I'm not just talking about going through the motions either. I'm not talking about just reciting endless prayers or coming to communion and then rushing out to your car. I'm talking about lending yourself to the work of worship. When you do that, when you get right into it, you're learning to see differently. You're looking at life through a different lens. It's the lens of eternity. And it's the reality that wisdom is helping to shape that lens. It's all about seeing differently. The extraordinary vision that Daniel paints for us in today's first reading is matched by an even more extraordinary and extravagant vision described by Jesus in the gospel today. And it's frightening. And it's confusing. But don't be frightened. And don't be confused. Because it all comes down to the basic reality that we have been talking about throughout this series. And that is that you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow, later and greater. And it's a truth that we should recognize and honor in our lives. It's a fact that can help us understand what's happened to us in the past and to learn from it. And it's a tool that you and I can use to our advantage. Really, the only challenge that we have been presenting through the course of this series for you is to take time to consider what seeds you're sowing in your life. Just take some time to consider what seeds you're sowing in your life. Financially, relationally, in your marriage, with your kids, with your extended family, even the in-laws, and with your relationship with God. And with your relationship with God. Just take time to consider where you might be sowing differently, where you might be sowing better seeds, and just talk to God about that. Talk to God about it, because as important and powerful a reality as the harvest principle is, it's important to acknowledge another reality that is even more important and more powerful too, and it's this. It's the reality of grace and mercy. And the reality of grace and mercy trumps everything else. It teaches us that you and I are not defined by our past. As much as the world might want to throw that down our throats, we are not defined by our past. You and I, are not the sum total of our mistakes and our missteps and our misdeeds. We're not. We're not. You're more than that. You are worth so much more than that. You are infinitely more than that.